welcome to The Dead Prophet. I'm your host, Mike Beckett, where we talk about a biblical worldview and real life colliding. It is an honor to have on our show today my college roommate and friend and best man in my wedding, actually, Cliff Forbes. And you have, over the last 20 years, you've been in the pastorate ministry. You've done youth pastor, campus pastor, lead pastor. You've been various different roles as far as pastor goes. And over the last year, you've had this opportunity to shift from the pulpit and move into an executive director role for a nonprofit organization called Trellis. And so I want to talk a little bit today about that organization, what you do. I think it's really fascinating, some of those three key power points that they talked about on their website about empowering and educating and equipping leaders. I think one of the interesting things that I've just, read through a little bit about this organization is you guys seem to have capitalized on the biblical Paul Timothy deal, which we don't see when we come out of our Bible colleges. I know you probably remember when we were in Bible college, they didn't as soon as we came out of the school and we went into our jobs or whatever, they didn't assign us a Paul. They didn't say, hey, here's a guy that's going to now mentor you in your role as a minister so that you can grow closer to Christ, grow closer to the leadership and kind of have that accountability. It wasn't there. And from the most part, from what I understand, it still isn't there from what I hear from many pastors that I've talked to over the years. So I think that's really something that is unique. And to me, when I was reading about this, and then I saw that you came out with a book, and we'll talk about that later as well, it intrigued me because you seem to have that missing component that is so needed in the lives of people who are going into or who are in the ministry. Usually by the time you're in ministry, you surround yourself with those people who are going to speak into your life and encourage you and hold you accountable. But that doesn't happen right away. And it's kind of shaky ground when you get out because you're young. Do I ask this older guy who's a senior pastor, hey, would you take me under your wings and mentor me so that I can become what God wants me to have? We don't do that. We don't see that. There's like an intimidation factor there. So, but I want to talk about Trellis. So talk about that. Tell me what Trellis is and what your role is and what you do.
Yeah. So, basically what you're talking about is what we experience across the church. And when I use church, I'm the body of Christ. We find that for Trellis, our main goal is to really come alongside those who are called it specifically into pastoral ministry for local church. We want to see local church thrive. And so what Trellis has done is our model is pretty simple. It's just that we want to work together with the local church, with universities, and with those called into ministry, and really give it everything all at once. So instead of students going to a university, having the college experience per se, what they do is they actually intern or have the residency right in the church. The church commits to them for that 3 or 2 year program, depending on what they're doing, while they get their education at the same time. So they're not just getting the theory and then later on in life getting the practical. They're getting the practical matched with theory right away. They're able to have a mentor in their life through the leadership of the church, through the elders in the church, and really have these foundational formation of what it means to enter into ministry successfully. And so they aren't left alone. I often tell young pastors, people who feel called to ministry, you were never meant to do this alone. And unfortunately, like you said, many of us, we've lived in a model where we might go to some classes, we go to a weekend worship service, but the intentionality of what it means to be mentored, the intentionality of what it means to be shaped and formed into ministry, that Paul Timothy analogy, an example, that's just something we typically don't see, unfortunately.
Right. And it's interesting because, there's been this big push in some of the universities out there today for competency-based learning. I know one of the universities I work for, that's their big deal. And one of the interesting things is, when we educate people, whether we are educating teachers, whether we're educating ministers, whether we're educating, people in the nursing fields, we educate them, we give them the theory, we give them all of the the information overload, but we don't give them that practical hands-on where they go and they become competent in it. I mean, because look, we had pastoral theory, we had pastoral counseling, we had pastoral finance, right? But we don't experience it until we're thrown into that position, and then you become a pastor and you have to come up with a $1 million budget or $100,000 budget or whatever the case is. So it's really crucial, I feel, to invest into the lives of those people who feel called into ministry and do it all at once. You're empowering them because you're recognizing, I guess, their call. We see that you have a call. This is what we're going to do. We're going to educate you. You're going to get your classes with the universities that are going to help you, and we're going to equip you and put you out there so that you can go ahead and kind of have that confirmation from God that this is what He's called you to do. Now, do most of these people, what's the age group? Are they all young? Are they a variety? Do they have full-time jobs? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting, just to kind of give some background to this. So in my role in the local church as a pastor, you kind of put your nose down to the grindstone and you minister to the group of people that you're with. And I did that for 20 years. And I was in a body that was thriving, growing, really awesome, to be honest. And I didn't realize what was happening in the rest of the church world, and the fact that by the time we hit COVID, the lack of those entering ministry is wretched. The amount of those staying in ministry through difficulty is horrible. And so you put those two things together, and then a lack of calling out the called, a lack of pursuing those with a calling in ministry to love on them, to really develop that. We're really in a crisis when we look at the church. We just do not have the leadership that's necessary. And a lot of times when I talk to pastors, there's this belief that there's this warehouse of students somewhere, and that that we just need to just simply put out the notice that we need a pastor, and there's going to be 100 applicants, and this is what it's going to look like. And so one of the things that I've really started to work with over the last year is this idea that as pastors, who are we working with, right? You ask about age group. And for us, when we look at undergrads, it's very typical in our culture that you hit 18, you move out of high school right into college. And so there's a big part of what we do that looks at and works with youth ministries. It says, hey, who is involved? Who does have that sense of calling on their life? Who would you look at and have a perception of this person may be called into ministry? And so we want to help them call those folks out. And then we do have others. We have especially with the master's program, that seems to be your 30, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, a little older in life. Maybe they've done it. They're already in church leadership somewhere, and they just want that biblical training. They want, to go deeper. They want to have that credentials so they can be brought on staff. So it's a pretty good range of students. We do everything from 18-year-old right out of college all to right now I have a 57-year-old that's going into ministry. So it's pretty broad.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, now you had mentioned two things there, and I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on it. You said we have kind of two problems, that within the crisis here within Christianity. The one is the low numbers of people entering, and then the numbers of leaving. So let's look at the first one. Why do you think there's kind of less people wanting to enter the ministry? Now, I know for myself and where we went, I came out with a beautiful debt. In fact, a debt that I was able to go back and get my teacher's certification at a university and get my master's, and still was cheaper than the debt I came out of from my undergrad Bible college. Thank God I have been paying and done what I needed to do. And this month, the rest of my debt goes away because of the PSLF. So I'm so excited. But why are there low numbers? Why is it, people aren't just going into, I feel called to ministry. I'm going to go Bible college. I'm going to go do it and run out. What are the concerns or the things you're seeing?
Well, yeah, it's a multi-prong issue, but one of the biggest ones I'll say is definitely that it doesn't pencil. When we look at the way in which church, the global church has bought into the American way of doing education. A lot of our seminaries, they started off with this desire to train pastors, and the prices matched what it would take to care for the professors, but also care for the future minister. And I don't know. I'd hate to say it was intentional, because I don't believe it was. I think it was out of good intentions. A lot of Christian universities, a lot of seminaries said, "Hey, let's go into liberal arts because there are these funds attached with guaranteed government funds,
Yeah.
That if we accept those students, we're going to create Christians in the workplace in all areas, not just the church. I think it has a great intention. The problem is that the seminary degrees, the masters, the undergrads all stayed pace at cost with what it takes to get a loan. And so if I'm paying $500 a credit hour as a engineer student, I pay $500 an hour for as a pastoral ministry candidate. To
And in the
great,
end, the pay is totally drastically different. You're going to start out as an engineer making six figures or pretty darn near close to it. And you're going to start out in a pastoral degree or pastoral ministry making anywhere from $100 a week to whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And so most parents do not desire for their children to go into ministry as their primary calling. One of the most difficult things I deal with is parents, not so much students. The younger generation, God cares way more about his church than we do. And so he's already calling on this next generation to do ministry in ways that we don't even understand because we're stuck in our own forms. That's a whole nother conversation. But when it comes to actually training them, most parents look at them and say, hey, why don't you get a real degree first? And then if you still feel called to ministry, get that later. And that way you can have a real income. So I think that the initial response to finances is very real. I mean, my debt for school is paid off simply because I refinanced it into my mortgage years ago. My wife's, her Christian education, we are still paying on that. And I have, another probably at this rate, another 2.5 years to go. And we are 45 years old and still paying on school debt, what could be a car payment, and
yeah.
So
and that's sad.
so
That's sad because it doesn't set you up. I remember there was several years ago, they had done those, how they do the top so many universities and stuff. And there was a thing that came out in one of those things, and they were ranked lower because they were looking at what you get your degree and the cost of your degree. And then they span out a 25, 30-year life of working in the field and being able to make what you've invested in it, how at that point it wasn't worth it. Of course, they've gone, as many of the other ones have, liberal arts, so you have other degrees. That's one of the things that I think is really interesting. And when we look at Paul was a tent maker and first, and then he did the ministry, and I think there's this I don't know if I can say kind of this deceptive idea that as soon as you graduate Bible college, you're going to walk into the pastorate with benefits, with the car allowance, house allowance. It's just going to be easy peasy, or you're going to be the youth pastor of like all these kids, but the reality is that's the like 10% of our churches in this country. Less than 10% of our churches, in this country are the ones that have the 250, 300 or more can afford the pastors for every 50 people. The reality is, if you're going into ministry today, you really need to be a full-time employee somewhere and then investing into the ministry outside of that. Not that becomes second, but the reality of the tent making, as Paul did, becomes the reality because we're living in a culture that today, for the most part, is anti-God, very secular, post-Christian. And so the influx of people coming into the church is not like it was maybe when we were teenagers or our parents were teenagers. So you're right. When it doesn't pencil out, you really want to try to think, what else can I do?
Yeah, it doesn't. Especially, I mean, the average size of the church in the United States is 85 people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is pretty much across denominations, across movements, 85 people. And so the idea, that you're going to have a 4-year degree, or a lot of churches maybe in their bylaws have that you're supposed to have your seminary, an MDiv, which is the equivalent really of a doctorate. It's not really a master's program when you're getting 100 credit hours in master's level cost.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not opposed to education at all. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing Trellis, right? Like we're trying to figure out how do we do both. The issue comes down to the fact that if you have a congregation that says, hey, our bylaws stipulate you have to have a master's level education in ministry, and we want to do this where you're going to be a part-time or volunteer. That's the majority of what our churches, how they're set up. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of shifts, a lot of things that I think need to occur in order for people to feel like they're going to have the freedom to do ministry. When the Bible says that the borrower is slave to the lender, for some reason, our schools have bought into the idea that it's still a good investment to go into debt. It's just not.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because not only does it not pencil, it creates this tension in a minister's life that really is not how do I want to say this? It creates this conflict of interest in the fact that I'm sitting on at my board table, and the people who make my salary, and for me to talk about my financial problems, well, I really should be caring about their spiritual problems. It's tension, right?
Yeah.
And there's lots of people that might hear this from the secular view and say, well, hey, if I decide to work as an engineer, that's the salary, that's what I make. And I think the problem is that in the church, there is no set salary.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, as a student, I go to school and I just expect that, hey, the Christian world sent me here. I'm going in debt 50, 60 grand. Obviously, I'm going to have a job when I come out that's going to pay that. And all of a sudden the world opens up and you realize that's not the case. Just because you have a 4-year degree in this field does not relate to a salary that you can bank on.
That's
So
right.
it's a different world.
And you brought up another thing that you noticed that seems to be critical is that people are leaving the ministry. People are leaving in droves, really. If we want to be honest with ourselves, they get into ministry and they burn out quicker than a public school teacher these days. Public school teachers, it's like 5-6 years are done. They're getting out there and they're just like this, I'm done. And in the midst of their leaving, most of them are leaving faithless, sometimes more than when they went in. And so what's the concern there? Why should we be concerned about that?
Yeah, I think, and again, I don't think anybody goes into ministry or social services or education, become a nurse, anything with these ill intentions. And I think that when you think most people, when they go into ministry, they're going into ministry, and a lot of them, like I said, if 85% of our churches have 85 people or less, the majority of our churches, a high majority of our churches are single staff. That's it. You're the only staff member.
Yeah.
So when you come out with very little practical experience, yet you have the weight of 40, 50, even 85 people on you trying to help them spiritually, you don't have the experience. You're all alone. You're isolated in that. It is more than what most people realize. When you sit in a hospital room one moment and you're to grieve with a family, and then your next meeting is with a couple who wants to get married, and you're supposed to be excited, and then you're supposed to worry about your wife or your spouse and the children at home, their responsibilities. The emotional roller coaster of a pastor is constant.
Right.
And I think that for most pastors, where they're burning out is more on the relational end. It all ends up being spiritual, in the fact that bleed on them impacts their faith, their journey, their pursuit of God. And I think that what's interesting is you talk to a lot of pastors or a lot of people that aren't in ministry, they aren't necessarily calling themselves faithless. Now, there are plenty who are, but they aren't all. They're not necessarily calling them faithless. They're just burnt out on what the church is, and the model that we're trying to follow, which isn't community, which isn't what we see in Scripture. It's pretty much, we hire you as a professional, now do your duty, and you're carrying a load that you weren't meant to carry. Right. And so by having these young guys go out there and start in ministry, and you have a board that's twice their age typically, and they're laying out the expectations as a 22, 23, 24-year-old.
That's intimidating.
That's very intimidating. And they're the ones that are telling you, hey, when I was your age, this is what I did. And a lot of these boards they don't know what it's like to actually oversee a budget, that what's proper, so there's just a lot of elements that go against a lot of guys in ministry. A lot of us in ministry just have felt the weight of, and the sacrifice, which ministry is a sacrifice, no doubt about it. It should be. I'm not an advocate that every pastor needs to be making 7 figures. But at the same token, there is the whole, a worker's worth their wage.
Yeah.
And how do we do that effectively in the church? We see it as early on in the Old Testament with Moses and Jethro. Moses is sitting on the throne. He's trying to run the entire nation. Jethro has to come to him and say, dude, get off the chair, and you got to break this down, and you got to create leaders who oversee the thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, right?
Right.
And it's a model of leadership that allows Moses to reconnect with his family and do what he's called to do and empower others.
Yeah.
And as soon as the church moves from that, no, you're the hired guy or the woman, whatever they do, you're going to do all this, and the body doesn't act as the body, and we encourage that, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the challenges, and I don't know if this is a concern that you have, because I looked, you guys have some pretty solid Christian colleges that are in there. I mean, really Bible teaching Christian colleges, which has always been a concern because somehow I got into this show series on the charismatics. And I have people who've come out of the charismatic movement that I went to college with. And I was interested to hear, because for a little while we were in that movement as well. And I was interested to hear their stories. Well, all of a sudden I've gotten in contact with these people. I mean, these nationally known people now that have come out. And we've kind of gone down that realm. And a lot of times in the charismatic movements, the ones that are like your Bethels and things like that are kind of the ones that are like, okay, we need to watch out what we're doing. you know um Education isn't pushed. It's all about feeling how you feel. And I know now for us, we attend a Methodist church. And I know my wife was looking at getting credentialed through them. Now Global Methodist Church is what it is, because they've had a split. That's been a fun 2 years watching that. um but in the United Methodist Church, you could be an engineer, you could be a counselor, you could go back, work with your pastor, work with your conference, and they will educate you. But they only educate you on a few classes, not enough that where then we have people who've had no ministry experience stepping into ministry roles, becoming bishops, and creating basically an organization that doesn't even follow its own discipline. That's a whole nother show, a whole nother story. But it seems to me that within the midst of this, the importance on the education is not only the book knowledge, but the practical, hands-on, getting out there and doing it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, yes, because the fact of the matter is that, being a pastor for 20 years, I have hired people who maybe I think, hey, they've read enough books, they have the experience, they've been in the church long enough, let's bring them on. And it's out of necessity rather than, best practice. And you get burned, and it hurts not just the person you hired, it hurts everyone in the church and their future generation. And so it's something we need to take very seriously, right? And one of the things that for me is, when I look at what our model is at Trellis, is that the education has to be vital. And one of the things that's become a byproduct that I don't think any one of us, when we started this, thought this would be the result. But what's happening is, typically in the typical model of what we do is we send a young pastor candidate off to college. They go to university, they come home at typical breaks, as a college student does, maybe visit their home church, and then go back. They graduate, and then we find out that the school has started teaching liberal theology, different things, right? There's certain professors that have been vetted, but they weren't vetted, or they ended up, being tenured. And so even though the school knows there's an issue, that they followed the world's model of tenuring them and not removing them. In our model, what happens is, these students, when they're going in class, we've created this accountability with the university that's live, because that student is in the church, they're doing 25 hours with the pastor. And when they start talking about, hey, we were just talking about our theology on baptism, and that professor is saying this, or I had a professor in one of our universities at one point had said that he believed a lot of the Old Testament was fables. And so within 3 hours, that student's already talking with their pastor saying, hey, what do you thought about this fable thing? I get a call, I'm able to call the university going, what's going on? Whereas typically that would have went on for an entire semester, no one would have known.
Yeah.
And so the beautiful thing about doing this is that we're creating accountability within our leadership of the church, our schools, and vice versa. Yeah. So it's interesting. We're starting to create this unity of working together for the next generation of pastors. And so it's helping, because it's bringing the university back to where they have to work with churches now every day, not just, hey, we educated them, we've sent them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's this dialogue that's happening now, just that I think the church and the schools and as a whole, we need to get back to, because I think it's going to create much healthier students, much healthier on the theology side. It's going to help us have actual conversations of what does it really cost to educate someone and equip someone. Because let's face it, no matter what your movement is, whether you're the Methodist, Church of God, Assemblies, Baptist, you should care about your theology and why you exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, I think that but in the ruts of ministry, a lot of people will grab any living body that is nice and welcoming, and we don't vet their theology well, and it hurts us because we're not actually doing what we're called to do as ministers of the gospel.
Right. Yeah. We just kind of take a warm body and throw it in there, and that's how it goes. Yeah, and you never know what you're going to get in the end. I remember when we were going to a church when we lived on the other side of the state. They had started doing this thing where they connected with one of the local Bible colleges, and they started to kind of like raised money in the church. They like took offerings and helped paid for the education for the person who was going to ministry. And you know, is there any of that that you see happening within your organization? Are they kind of, churches are like, well, we're going to try to help with that debt. Maybe we'll pay for the education. Maybe we'll give them a stipend. Do something like that to kind of help ease the burden when they get out of that debt factor.
Yeah. So the way our financial model works is pretty simple. So what we've done is we've negotiated with the schools a rate for the education. So an undergrad for us costs $28,000 all in when a student gets accepted to Trellis. So we have our assessment. We have assessment tools that we've created through an assessment group that does this. They're nationally vetted. I mean, they're psychos analyzed, all that jazz. So once we accept them, the university has agreed to basically we've cut the cost of education in half. So the school's invested, they're using their grants, they're using their scholarships. So if a student gets accepted by us and they apply to a school, they know they're going to receive every grant, every scholarship that offers possible, even more typically, because most students don't receive that much financial aid from the school. So that leaves about $10,000 a year because we do a 4-year degree in 3 years, the way we have the student go through the summer. So then the commitment on the church end is $10,000 a year towards the intern. Now, what we tell the intern is while you're being paid $10,000, that actually is going directly towards your school debt. You need to think of yourself like a scholarship student. If you were a scholarship basketball student, you're going to be doing basketball, you're going to be going to trainings, that's what you do to pay for your education.
That's your job, and your pay goes right to your education. Yeah, yeah.
Right. But in the same token, what we've done is that 20 hours a week for a year has made it fair for a church to pay that to an employee who's learning, right? They're getting 20 hours a week, $10,000 a year. That's what the church is committing. So the student never takes on any debt. On the student's end, we want everybody to have some skin in the game. And so obviously we have costs at Trellis. There's admin costs. We don't take that education cost at all. What we do is we actually have the students pay us a $3,000 a year fee that we do our assessments, our site visits. Every year we visit the church to make sure that they're not using them as cheap labor. We're continuing that. We work with each church monthly in a coordinator Zoom call where we actually are working on the training, what's happening, how do we make sure that each church is doing their internship properly. And then we have post-placement where we actually work with them on creating their portfolio and then doing assessments on churches where they might want to pursue a job, where we try to dig in. We interview the pastors, the elder board, whatever they have. We actually do a sampling of their church body, create an assessment of that church so we can compare it to our student and say, hey, this is a good fit. This is where you're going to have to bring in some help. This is where you're already strong, and help them make decisions. So
that's great.
We have the students investing $3,000 a year. So in essence, they've invested $9,000 of their own money. The church is investing $10,000 a year towards that student, and the college is giving them the grant. And then the other thing we ask of is the local church, what we call a hub church that's doing the training, they also provide housing. So whether that's an in-law suite in someone's house, or it's actually an apartment that they rent, or they give them a monthly stipend so they can rent their own place. A lot of churches do that differently because of economics of, Tampa Bay versus Western PA.
Right. Yeah.
Two totally different situations, $1,800 for a one-room flat versus, a house with 20 acres for $1,800 in Western PA. So a little different. So each church, we work on the housing component a little different. Now, initially, I will say, now it's starting to happen more and more. What we've done is we've worked with, kind of going back to that whole parents are some of the biggest issues, because they're like, we do not want our child to have a ministry degree and debt. A lot of people don't want their child to have a ministry degree. It doesn't matter whether it has debt or not. They don't have a real degree. So what we've done is we've worked with the universities so that a student getting an undergrad gets a full business degree, undergrad business, and a full undergrad in ministry for 120 credit hours. completely paid for. That way they have a business degree, they have their ministry degree, and they have the education or the practical experience in the church. So it's a pretty simple model. Everybody has some skin in the game, but we've made it so that it's feasible for everybody to do what they do. And 3 years at the end of the process, everybody's been blessed by it. Church has had somebody who's helped them for the 3 years. Plus, they've their DNA as a church is now a training church. They're a training hospital, not just they realize that the people in the church, awesome things happen. The people in the church realize they're a part of sharing the gospel with someone else when they send that person. The youth ministry now realizes, hey, somebody that's not 75 in the pulpit, but somebody who's 19, 20 years old, I can do that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden we have applicants coming from the youth ministries because the reality of the church training up leaders is real. It's visual. That's who they're friends. I mean, they know.
Wow.
So we're seeing a lot of benefits of the church taking back on the responsibility of training up pastors and working with them. Not just on the financial side, but in many ways, a benefit to the church.
What a novel idea to let's stick to scripture when we do this, right? Because we see this model throughout scripture on how to train up leaders and train up the next generation of apostles, teachers, preachers, evangelists, and so forth. Yeah. Well, that is great. That is great. And if anybody has any questions or anybody is interested, they can reach you.
TrellisChurches.com.
Okay.
One word, TrellisChurches.com is the easiest way. If you have a church, you're like, hey, I want to help train pastors. There's an application. It's called a hub church. You just go down and look at our hub churches and fill out an application. If you're a student, no cost to it for the church or the student, and say, hey, I feel called to ministry. I'd like to look at this. They can do the same thing.
Great. So I want to shift gears from this. I think this is great work. This is a great opportunity to finally for the church to invest into like you said, the next generation of leaders. And what an amazing thing that they come out with 2 degrees. So if they can't get a job in a church, or they get a job in a church that's small and can't afford to pay them, they have the opportunity to get into the business world and do marketing or whatever they need to do to help kind of pave the way so that they can survive. And that's great. Because I had this misconception when I came out. I got this little teaching certificate. I think you remember that little teaching certificate we got with our diploma? I'm like, oh, I can go teach. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't go into the schools and teach with this teaching certificate. But on the other side, you have written a book. Now, you are a father of 8, and and you have the whole gamut of ages. The oldest is 20 now, 19, 20?
20, yeah. She'll be turned 20 next week.
And the youngest is 1?
She's 2.
2? Yeah, okay, I was close. So you've got them. You've got the whole gamut of age groups there. You add yourself, and you've got a baseball team.
That's right.
I think we can fix the Pittsburgh Pirates now.
Yeah.
But you wrote a book, and it is entitled Sacred Moments. And tell us a little bit about this book and a little bit about your journey on writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, when you say book, it's a little deceiving. It's more of like a parental guide. It's a parent guide, because here as a father, me and my wife, we have devotions with our kids in the morning. My wife, she's the one that does that. I don't want to take credit. She's phenomenal at that. I'm not. She'll do the daily devotional, and then at night we have this routine where we always put our kids to bed and we always have prayer time with them. And what I found is that you get into the rut of everyday prayers. You start just saying the same thing, right? You're repeating. And as a father, the last thing I want is my kids to get into the ritual of Christianity rather than the actual communing with God and having conversations with God.
Yeah.
So the concept was real simple. I just was like, hey, I would like this kind of a tool where what are some basic prayers, nighttime prayers. I have 7 nighttime prayers and 8 other time prayers, a prayer of salvation in there, that are just written so that they can pray for their nation, they can pray for their families, they pray for their friends, they pray for forgiveness. Just different types of prayers that a parent could use simply with illustrations. My kids love them. And they just we just read it, we pray, and then I say, what would you like to also pray for? And we add those in. We've been through my book since it's been published 3 times, which I thought my kids would be like, this is dumb, it's dad's, whatever. Every night they want dad's book. And, we just work through it and they just pray, and so it's cool. It's good. Yeah, it's real good.
Yeah, it says you have 15 different prayers to pray with your children with illustrations, which is great. And this book is available on Amazon. And do you have a website yet?
If you go, my generic site is just cforbes.net.
Okay.
It's really just a short story. It's kind of like a picture of me and my wife, some sermons that I've preached, the books there. It's just a way of connecting with me.
Yeah.
As a pastor, my heart's more for the local church. And, even though I travel the world now, literally we're working in Europe and everywhere else at this point with Trellis, but in the United States, you get to travel a lot. But my heart is a local church. And so on there, it's really just, I created it so that I could tell the local church, hey, if you need pulpit fillers, intern, whatever, while I'm home, let me help you.
There you go.
Do that,
right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Cliff, it was great to connect with you today. I'm so excited what God's doing with your life through Trellis and what he's doing in the lives of those going into ministry and feeling called to ministry. Definitely excited about this book, The Sacred Moments, Prayers to Pray with Your Child. And I encourage our viewers, if you get a chance, to check out Cliff's website at cforbes.net. Go to Amazon, get the book, and again, you can reach him at trellischurches.com. And but it was great to have you on the show. One of the things we like to do here at the Dead Prophet is just encourage our listeners to continue to live a life as an authentic disciple of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Mike Beckett. Again, encouraging you to live an authentic life as a disciple of Christ. We'll see you next time on the show. Bye-bye. Oh, is it time?